Welcome, everyone, to another episode, Conversations That Matter. Today, I have a very special guest to you, and I believe, as I am already now inspired from our pre-interview discussion, you will get lots of wisdom share from JP Marsh, co-parenting coach. And we will be talking not just about the parenting, co-parenting, but I believe we will touch the ground base, how to avoid the conflicts, the negative dynamics, because we need to remember when we become parent, it's not about us. It's in the majority about our kids. Welcome, JP Marsh, and
Hi,
thank you for being here with us today.
thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's very interesting how the universe created the alignment.
hmm
Today, I have been in church, and
hmm
for our audience, by the way, at my side in Belgium, we are having already almost end of the day. JP is starting the day with us. So that's a beautiful spirit here. I was at the church, and there was a nice message about when the things are going wrong in our life, we run to church and we are begging for help to solve our
hmm
problems. And we talk, 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 but we do not give a space to listen.
hmm
And it resonated with me today, parenting and the role of communication. Just starting from the communication, which is such a multidimensional element, quality, and value in our daily life.
hmm
What's the role of communication in parenting construct?
The better that you can learn, teach, and be at communication in all aspects of your life, the better your life is going to be. I mean, whether it's professional relationships, parenting, co-parenting, talking with your friends, talking with, the better that you can communicate with the people around you, the better off you're always going to be. But being able to have honest communication with yourself is going to be the deciding factor of how well you're going to be able to communicate with other people, especially in the co-parenting space or, with your children and these kinds of things, um, because I said so, because I'm your parent, I said so, this is it, you know, those, that's not communication, that's dictatorship, you know what I mean? And so being able to communicate why your kids should wear a helmet when they're riding their bike or skateboard, as opposed to you wear it every time because I said so. Well, when they get around the block, they're going to take the helmet off because they don't, that's not communication. That's not guidance. That's not, leading. That's dictating. And I mean, when I was a kid, when my parents would say these things, of because I said so, because I make the rules, because it's my house, these sorts of things. But also in the divorce, the co-parenting, the parenting type space, if you can't, be honest with yourself and be honest with your self-reflection, the way that you communicate and view your own communication with the people around you is going to dictate as much of how well you communicate with the people around you. Because typically when you get divorced, you know, you have your family and your group of friends that go, you win in the divorce. They
Mm.
have their family and their group of friends that they win in the divorce. And regardless of what the reality is, you basically have a lot of yes men telling you they're the problem. You're right, they're wrong. You're right, they're wrong. They're the problem. They're the bad parent. They're the ones being difficult. They're the ones high conflict. And it's easy to sort of get in this habit of listening to this noise or the people that are just compounding your beliefs, your views, and the way that you're, communicating in the way that you're seeing the situation because they're only getting the story that you're telling. You know what I mean? So if you're omitting truths because you're lying to yourself and you're not able to even have open communication internally, it's hard to start communicating with the people around you because you'll start to believe I'm always right. They're the problem. I don't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? And like, but it goes, even if you're still married and you're trying to raise your kids to be, healthy, competent adults, do you want them to, you know, you kind of have two paths. You can be the type of leaders and type of parents that say, you know, I want you to skateboard and I want you to enjoy it and I want you to be good at it, but I want you to wear a helmet and pads and let's go on YouTube and I'll show you why. And it's not because I said so. It's because this can happen, this can happen. You can, if you fall off and hit your head hard enough falling backwards, like this kid did, this is the end result. And this is why I don't want you to, risk these injuries over for no reason, as opposed to the because I said so.
Interestingly, you have said, because I said so. And I think that's kind of a quality that we have anchored over the generations
Hmm.
because we learn that. And I call it usually a vertical process of adaptation. And it says we have been told how we should be. So we are copying, pasting these kind of behaviors when we become parents.
Hmm.
We have that in our mind. Our parents said, that's my home, as you said.
Hmm.
So the rules are here, as I say. No
Right.
question, no communication, no discussion here. That's the also very common sentence. Like, no discussion here because I said so.
Right.
And at some age, I can understand because we cannot expect from 4 years old child to have the same understanding of surrounding as world. And
Hmm.
for the safety, you need to be because I said so. That's it.
Right.
But
Right.
while the kids are growing, they are learning
Hmm.
from the environment, from the
Right.
kindergarten, from the school. So we are not able to measure what is happening in this little head. And the communication, especially this century, instead to grow, is limited.
Hmm.
And we replace our presence in the communication with the rectangle called phone.
Right.
And then believe the dynamic and even the value of raising kids is changing significantly.
It is.
In one of the shows that you have
Hmm.
been guest, and I think it was with Dory Darbin,
Hmm.
where you were talking about do's and don'ts for the co-parenting.
Right.
But also you have mentioned the co-parenting is not the moment where we are during the divorce or after divorce. The
Hmm.
co-parenting process is during the marriage. So
Right.
can you explain us what is co-parenting and its dimensions?
Well, it's because of the way that the world is now, as opposed to, 100 years ago. It's less likely that people are having certain conversations before they decide to get married, which would be the conversations of 5-year plans, 10-year plans, lifetime goals, where they want to retire, what kind of finances they're working towards, how they parent, parenting styles, school systems for their children, discipline styles, all of these different things that are going to become issues or you know, need these things are going to come up throughout your kids' lives and throughout your marriage, but people aren't having these discussions as much as they probably should going into a marriage or going into having children. And so if I got lucky in my situation because I was raised in a small town, in a rural area. So was my daughter's mother. So our value system, disciplinary styles, the way we look at phones, the way we look at, certain parenting style type stuff, discipline, how they to get disciplined, these things are have aligned. And so some of these conflicts I haven't necessarily had to really butt heads over or anything like that. And I lucked out because we didn't have these conversations going into our relationship and having our daughter, and that's more common than not, is where you're not having these conversations. And so now you have, even if you're married and you have your first child, because you haven't had these conversations or didn't have these conversations beforehand, if one person wants a tablet to raise their child from 4 years old and up, and the other parent's like, no, my kids are not going to be addicted to phones and tablets and they don't need screen time, you know, this is co-parenting. You're still married, but you're going to have to find a solution. Now, you know, spankings, disciplinary styles, taking away toys, all of these different things are going to play into, whether you're married or not, it's still co-parenting. Because if one person is a super gentle parent, who wants to have 45-minute conversations with a 2-year-old about this, that, and the other, well, the other parent's like, dad voice comes in, says, go to bed, you're sick.
Mm,
I mean, these are two opposite sides of a spectrum, and you're going to get into a lot of conflict, especially when you can't communicate very well because one person's going to try to impose their will because I'm right, you're wrong. And so
mm,
even when that snowballs a bit, um, not being able to communicate whose responsibilities are these and this responsibility, now we're a team, but maybe this is more what you take care of, I take care of this, and you're going to avoid a lot of conflicts if you sort of can communicate these kinds of things. But a lot of times you start butting heads because this is the way
mm,
I was raised and this is the way my parents did it, and I turned out okay, so I'm right, your way's wrong. I'm going to impose my will. No, you don't do it like that. Do it like I
mm,
do it, and that tends to be a big obstacle for a lot of, you know, uh, tends to be one of them obstacles that starts a snowball effect when they're still married, and it kind of rolls downhill because one big gripe is that the dads aren't as involved as the moms would like when they're married. But the part that kind of gets left out is how much the dads are being critiqued by the mom because they don't do it. They're not necessarily doing something wrong or not doing it
mm,
well. They're not doing it the way that the mom wants it done. And so get out of my way, now I'll do it.
mm,
Then when they get divorced, no, I don't feel safe with him, the kid's going over there and staying weeks at a time, not because he's doing necessarily something wrong. It's more often because they won't have an honest conversation with themselves that he does it different, but it's not wrong. But they want him to do it the way that they want it done or the way that I do it, as opposed to, your parenting style. And so that it just keeps this conflict going back and forth of imposing wills, whether it be ego or control. A lot of people don't like to give up whatever control that they have. And so then it just, turns into this repetitive cycle of I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, and back and forth. And everybody wants to impose their own will. Don't tell me how to,
this
it's
kind
my
of
house. Don't tell
battleship,
me.
this
Right.
kind of battleship thing are happening in majority of relationship.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, we are talking about subject that majority of people getting together do not have this kind of discussions.
Right.
And when we are going through even statistics of divorce, like,
Hmm.
oh, we are having differences in character.
Hmm.
Okay, where have you been before you get married? And theoretically, we expect when we are adult, we are mature. So what's the
Right.
consequence of getting married? It's not a fun, it's not a boat trip,
Right.
it's building world for most probably a child. So already at that stage, there should be some this kind of mature imagination, vision.
Hmm.
Any action I take now, it will have consequences.
Right.
Am I with the right partner to
Right.
do that? It's fun because the surface world looks okay. And then again, quite often, very quickly after getting married, oh, I thought after marriage you will change.
Right.
And then the battleship is starting.
Right.
Then the kids are coming. And it's quite sad because can we blame people? Mm, we can hold people responsible, but they try, I believe, as much as they know how to
Hmm.
try, how to be the parent. But no one is actually teaching us or showing us the way before, during, and after
Right.
how to become a mature person.
Over the last, three, four generations, as the divorce rates keep going higher and the, you know, single parent homes continues to rise, and then you throw on the tablet, the phone, the social media sort of aspect of it as well. Um, we've lost the most, I think one of the most crucial parts of raising a child has gone out the window because
Mm.
I'm a firm believer of it takes a village to raise a child. I like the idea of my daughter spending a lot of time with aunts and uncles and cousins and other families and the parents of their friends and grandparents and you know not people, and it's, some are liberal, some are conservative, some
Mhm.
are more extreme than others. Everybody's got different, thought processes, ideals, values, a little bit, and they can pull all of these different things and become a multifaceted person, where, I mean, you still need, the most important people are the parents to guide their kids and do these things. But, you know, follow these teachers, listen to these
Mm.
people at school, but also think about this. And then your grandparents are thinking this way, and everybody thinks from all these different ways. Now you have parents who are raising their kids on tablets and phones, and same as the ads algorithms and all of these other things that you get, you're
Yeah.
getting a one-track thought process. You know what I mean? And so then you have a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid now who is limited access to their dad or mom. And then with that limited access, it's limited access to that entire side of the family,
Mm.
probably. And then, instead of going, staying the night at friends' houses like we did, now it's they're FaceTiming with their friends. And so they're not sitting around a kitchen table at their friends' houses. They're not sitting around the living room
Beautiful
or
times.
doing barbecue stuff with other families who are going to have conversations with and around them that maybe aren't the same types of thoughts that I have or the viewpoints of the world that I have and this and that, but they can sort of pull from all of these places, and you're stuck on this screen, and you're following people who think exactly like you, and you're watching things that only tell you the exact way that you think already. And so then you don't get all of this, you don't get a stew pot of all kinds of thoughts,
Yeah.
worldviews, and all of these things. And then they become young adults, and anytime that there's somebody that disagrees with them, sees the world differently, they've never been confronted with that. And then it's a freak out because they don't know what to do because their entire belief system's being attacked because they've never seen another point of view. And I think that's getting to be a dangerous waters that we're, you know, the world is wading into.
Especially when we are yeah, connected with friends through the uh, FaceTime or
Hmm.
WhatsApp messages, Snapchat.
Right.
It's kind of tool which cuts off completely the sound of emotions.
Hmm.
because it's a dry writing.
Right.
It's a dry writing. On top of that, when I saw my son, the way how he's writing with his friends, they
Hmm.
are writing in this kind of today new generational slang that
Right.
they cut off letters from the words.
Right.
And I don't know, 5, 6 word sentence, they are shrinking into 5 letters.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Right.
And I believe it has a huge impact on them, the shrink of ability to communicate.
Hmm.
To From my work, what I have noticed also among adults is a huge drop of literacy of expression.
Right.
If we look further, I can imagine that the communication in the house and the younger generation can be limited.
Right.
Then showing the emotions, aligning emotions to how kids are feeling at that moment are disconnected.
Right.
And it's happening, as you said. They go out, they are becoming adult. Someone says no, or no, it's not that way.
Right.
And the kiddo, young adult, is off the cliff,
Right.
mental cliff.
Right.
Just don't know
And
how to do it now,
and I
what to
mean,
do now.
we see it, it's a in the US, I mean, we saw it the last 2 or 3 election cycles with our
Mm,
presidential elections and stuff like that. And you have these people who have planted their flag in their yard and have dug their heels in and it's a, in the US, it's a big us versus them, this side, political side, that political side. Nobody's out for the betterment of the people because if they came up with this idea that it'll help our country, this whole other side says no because it was the other side that brought it up, and vice versa. And then you get, I mean, you have all these protests and you have all these different things and all the things that have been just going around our country because they've never had to deal with any sort of disagreement or conflict or these things. And so then it becomes, and and it's not a deal where they can stop and be like, oh, okay, so let me process this and see if it makes sense. It's a deal
mm,
where then they just start screaming, and it's like a toddler's temper tantrum. You know what I mean? And so, but that's the dangerous part of letting social media and letting a phone or tablet or TV raise your children. And also, our school systems are lacking in the US as well, and that's kind of a big deal that's sort of kind of getting more into people's minds now than it has been in the last, 15, 20, 30 years. But it also is we live in an era where we've never been more connected but disconnected at the same time.
yes,
Because like you said, I mean, everybody's using, we use slang words and talked a little bit different. The 80s, people said tubular, rad, this and that, da 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 da. And then in the 90s, it was other words. And then in the 2000s, it was other words. But you were still talking face to face. And you still looked people in the eye when you
that's
had
so true.
conversations with them, and you could be in person and have conversations. People that have been, the younger generations now that everything's been through screens and text and this and that. I mean, I still run a construction deal up here, and there's a big difference when I hire somebody that's 35 years old compared to somebody that's 22 years old of how they can look you in the eye and how they present themselves and if they're slumped over and you know one can go and one needs direction step by step, play by play because they've never had to actually do anything before. And you mix in other aspects where I where I live is a super rural area. Where I live, it's a community of people. Everybody still looks out for each other. It's mostly conservative. It's mostly blue collar. It's oil wells, cattle ranches, and grain, farmers. And then all service industries that kind of flood into that, in one way or another. But, we do the 4-H, we have the county fair, there's a lot of community events, the parades, and all these things. And the people in the community, it's still a community where we're all looking out for each other. And if there's something weird going on, everybody in the community starts telling everybody else to look out for this odd thing, these creepy deals, this weird rig or automobile, da 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 da. But it's a slower paced life, and it's a more involved life, and it's a more fruitful life as opposed to living in a big
Real
metropolitan
life.
city. It's not a rat race here. People are connecting with each other and talking face to face and doing community activities. Whereas bigger cities have kind of lost that. Everybody's a stranger, even if you live in the same building.
You don't have this kind of social responsibility anymore.
Right.
And when you are having in the families something, some conflicts, there is no healthy support. Like going back to the co-parenting, and
Hmm.
we are in the marriage, we are having some conflicts. It's fire up by the external
Right.
environment.
Right.
The cheerleaders are there, and there's a child, single
Right.
standing, and no one
Well,
cares.
and it is. And it's sad that people get no kid has to be born, but every parent chose to have a child. And, to go a step farther than that, your children didn't choose for you to not allow them access to the other parent. And so it's, the data is overwhelming. Once you can get out of your own pity party and get out of your own feelings and take a and be honest with yourself that, I'm not perfect. I'm probably just as, you know, as conflictive as I want to paint the other person to be. I need to get a objective, you know, you can't get out of your own feelings and you can't see things in reality when everybody around you is telling you that your perception is right or you're right, they're wrong, and all these different things. The best thing that you can do is get somebody who doesn't have any chips in the game that can be like, if you're being the issue, that they will tell you that you're the issue. You know,
Mm,
you're handling these situations bad. You're being a baby about every stupid little thing that comes up because you just want to throw a fit about it or you feel attacked and this is not what's actually happening, and you're hurting your kids more than you're hurting the other parent when your intention is hurting the other parent. And
mm,
so you kind of you it but it's an addictive, same as feeling sorry for yourself, same as the attention that you're getting because, oh, I'm the one being abused, he's a narcissist, they're doing this to me, look how bad they are,
mm,
feel sorry for me, give me attention, validate my reactions, and all these different things. And it's easy to get in this pattern or addictive, you know state of, feeding off being the victim or feeding off the attention because you can paint them bad, or da 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 da. And it's different for everybody, and there's all these different reasons, but it's, you know, as somebody who was being a baby all the time when I was in a, more conflictive situation early on in our co-parenting journey, like once I quit being a baby and stopped being instantly defensive and was able to respond rather than react to the communications that we were having, the better I got, the better my reality got, the better our situation got, the better our time got, the better we got. And then it just compounds.
mm,
And then the better we got, the better I felt. The better I felt, the better we got. And it just kept building off of that. And instead of needing to be this, poor me, pity party sort of mentality and, feed off this attention and da 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 da, then it became, well, I feel better. We're better.
mm.
My daughter's better. Now I'm better. And we're better. My daughter's better. And it's stacked on top of itself. And then all of a sudden life is better. And I don't need the pity party and I don't need the validation or the attention. in these things because, I enjoy the fact that when my phone goes off, I don't cringe. And when I
Mm.
see her name on my phone, I don't instantly have my nervous system go into hyperdrive and fight or flight and instantly, feel like I need to start, defending myself when all it
Mm.
is a simple question.
We are falling in love with each other. We create a dream world with no
Right.
discussion, with
Hmm.
no making kind of metrics check. Are
Hmm.
we really aligned? Do we have the same vision? We are building this dream based on our silenced
Right.
dream, but because we hold each other hand, it's our dream, right?
Right.
I I might say that in a bold way, but I believe so. Deciding to have a child is kind of selfish purpose driven act
Hmm.
because that's the part of my dream. Here
Right.
is the husband, here's the house, and here's the baby.
Right.
The action is completed, the dream is completed. So if we really go from the really deep level, it's a selfish purpose.
Hmm.
Then we fall apart because we have realized that we built the walls, but we didn't connect those walls.
Hmm.
The wind is too strong through the walls, and house collapsed. And selfishly, again, we appear on the scene in that conflict of blaming.
Hmm.
Selfishly, we will pull the child to be our card.
Right.
How cruel it is actually to see to what level the child has been brought to.
I mean, there's a lot of your children aren't accessories to complete some fantasy Barbie doll dream home sort of deal. But also, kids are not going to fix your already disruptive, diminishing marriage. You know what I mean? You know, if you need an accessory to complete a package, then get a dog. Don't have kids. And if your marriage is starting to crumble or fall apart because you didn't have those discussions leading into a marriage about, long-term goals, where you want to live, the kind of life you want to lead, these, those, and the others, a child's not going to save your marriage either. Then, when the inevitable happens and the marriage does dissolve, until you can grieve the relationship, accept the reality that you're in, and start to move on, it's hard to not, you know, see the other person that you are having these high conflict situations with through your child because,
Mm,
your kids are still going to look like the other parent to some extent or have tendencies or remind you or these, those, and the others. And so, one of the biggest things that a lot of parents and a lot of people don't necessarily think of, and I mean, it happens with married couples, as well, that I'm 42 years old and I still think that I'm 50% mom, 50% dad. And so even knowing that you're not thinking about it that way, if you're sitting around bashing the other parent with your kids around, the other parent's not hearing what you're saying about them, but your kids are taking every single bit of that abuse. Because if my mom hates my dad that bad, then she must hate me as well. Or if my dad hates mom that much, he must hate me, or at least half of me. And so
mm,
then, you give 10, 12, 15 years of that. It's no wonder that your kids don't want anything to do with you when they have the chance to move out of the house because all you've been doing is emotionally beating them for, 15 years. But it's something that people just don't think of. I mean, unless it gets brought up or you think about it, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, well, I don't talk bad about my kids and I'm this kind of parent and this and that and all these things. And then it's like, well, but you sit around and talk bad about the other parent nonstop in front of your kids. Like your kids are taking all of that abuse, not the other parent, because the other parent's not there to hear it. When you're having kids without thinking about it later in life, or you have the accidental pregnancies and these things and those things, your kids are taking all of this stuff and being caught in the middle, and they didn't ask to be here. And so, but it's a lot of times, people are unwilling to look in the mirror and see where their shortcomings are, or see how their actions are actually affecting their kids, or what they're saying is actually doing to the people around them. It's hard for people to take accountability and look in the mirror and see these you know attitudes, the way that they are and the way that their actions are affecting their kids. You know what I mean? Because it's easy to stay in this depressed sort of state, or stay angry, or stay resentful, and stay in these habits, and just turn the TV on and put your kid in front of it watching Disney for 12 hours a day while you doom scroll
Mm,
on Facebook to feed your addiction. Or you know dad doesn't feel like doing anything today, and so go watch movies all day, and I'm going to lay in bed. Or you
mm.
know but it takes conscious effort, and I don't think it's intentional. I'm a firm believer that everybody's doing the best they can with the tools that they have. It's just whether or not you can realistically assess what you're doing and the effects that you're having. And a step farther is most people are unwilling to face their own childhood baggage and trauma
Mm.
to get through it, so where they don't just repeat these generational curses and cycles down to their kids. And so, you're doing the best you can with what you know, but is it the best? You know? And so, but shutting down, being a parent, even if you're a busy person, I work 40, 50 hours a week in a day job. I do the coaching thing and the podcasting thing 20, 30 hours a week on top of that. Plus, I'm a single dad. I have no help. We live in a place where all of our family is in a third of the country away. And so I do all of the single parenting stuff on my own, with my daughter's mother. But I do all of my grocery shopping. I do all of the shopping for my house, a week and all of these different things. I don't, have really anybody to help pick her up, drop her off, these things. And, but when I have her, I don't work. I'm not doing the editing for the podcast. Everything else is backseat. So when I have her, it's dad time, and we do things. It's not a deal where here's your tablet, I got a bunch of stuff to do, stare at the screen while I'm doing the things that I want to do, you know. But it being
The-
intentional is a big part.
Either positive or negative situations is happening. It's like a tango. We need
Hmm.
two. In reality, when there is a positive scenario, we say yes. When the negativity is happening, we are pointing with the fingers, you.
Hmm.
We somehow, in this childish manner, we don't see ourselves that we did also something wrong here
Right.
that led to that negativity. I was reading recently some research from the Psychology Today. And here's the quick note, since we are around the conflict.
Hmm.
The parental conflict, more than separation itself, is what harms children most. What can parents do to manage their conflict while they are still
Uh,
married?
it's all going to start with communication, but also having a little bit of grace, empathy, and understanding is going to go a long ways. I mean, being able to communicate effectively, especially, having disagreements, but not having big drag out arguments, because you don't want to paint this picture of this perfect sort of fantasy, and that's all your kids see, and there
Mm,
never being any conflict, there's never any arguments, there's never any disagreements. And so then when they become adults, oh my God, my parents had this perfect marriage and they never had disagreements. So now that I'm married, why am I having disagreements? I must not have found the right person. You're not teaching them good lessons for later in life. So, being intentional of what kind of disagreements are healthy and what kind of conversations your kids need to witness and experience, secondhand, because that's real life.
mm,
It's not Disney princess, it's not Marvel, somebody's going to come and save me. It's real life. Real life has disputes, disagreements, conflict, and conflict resolution. Um, but teaching them emotional control while having disagreements is going to be a big, in these things. And so, but not having to be a control freak, not having to impose your will, not having to be a narcissistic, tendencies of I'm always right, you're always wrong, do it the way I said, you know what I mean? So compromise is,
mm,
teaching compromise is going to be a big thing. Um, Being supportive, even maybe when it's not your idea, being, supportive of, okay, that's not how I would do it, or that's not exactly what I wanted to do. I know I don't, I don't necessarily want to have to go to your family's for every Christmas or Thanksgiving or holiday, but I'm not going to ruin everybody else's thing about it because it's not something I don't want, because I don't want to do it. Or I'm
mm,
still going to be supportive in our relationship by doing things that maybe I don't necessarily want to do, or being around your family if I don't necessarily get along with them, love them, this, that, those, and the others. I'm not going to just be like, well, that's your deal. I'm not going. And so being a team and showing your kids that, you know, maybe that you're going to have to do things you don't want to do, or you're going to have to be a part of interactions and situations and things that maybe you don't want to be a part of, but you're still going to be there and be supportive and do them without ruining everybody else's time or without ruining the trip for everybody else or some of these things. And so I think being able to stay in control of your emotions when maybe you have disagreements and being able to talk through situations as a family or at least in front of the entire family so that you don't paint this fantasy of there's never any conflict, there's never a disagreement, there's never because I think that is kind of the to an extent, especially when I became a single parent, my daughter was 2. She only basically knows us as 2 separate households and the way that we are now. Whereas when you're hiding every conflict and you have 12-year-olds and then you get divorced and they don't even think that you've ever had a disagreement, then you're blindsiding everybody. And then they internalize a lot more of that because well, they
where
were
it
perfect
comes
and
from.
everything was perfect. It must be my fault. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And so you haven't been honest with your kids. You haven't shown them that there's going to be disagreements. You're going to maybe work for somebody that you don't like. You're going to have teammates that you don't get along with. And, that's life. Whereas you've been teaching them that, oh, everything's rainbows and sunflowers and unicorns, and then all of a sudden now they're thrown out in the real world, and there's people who think differently than them are going to tell them, you know, well, I sign your paycheck. This is the way I want it done. You know what I mean? And so they have no compass of conflict resolution because you've always kept it behind closed doors.
conflict. The agreement is a part of world, part of life, part of love.
Right.
To
Right.
have agreement, but how we maintain that, how we handle it, that's the core part to child to see. Oh, they
Hmm.
are arguing. Oh, but there is no, Kill Bill too.
Right. 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 And
Right?
it's it's something like communication, um, conflict resolution. There was a lot of these things that weren't necessarily something that I learned growing up. My family was, it wasn't a lot of positive reinforcement. It was a lot of, when you did something wrong, that's when you got attention. That's when that kind of stuff. There wasn't a lot of the positive reinforcement. You're doing a great job. You know what I mean? But it was a fairly emotionally disconnected household, and that's kind of where I grew up. And communication was something that was kind of not prioritized, and so I had to learn these things at 30 something years old. And that was one of those deals, when we were in a more we were in a situation where it was a revolving door of I would get a text, I would get triggered because I would instantly get defensive. Didn't matter what it was about, what it was about, or my
Mm.
instant defensiveness would trigger the fight or flight. I would react as opposed to respond. Then it would turn into poking back and forth for a few days, and then it would turn into a big blow up, a week later, or something like that. And I had to train myself to stop reacting and start responding. Once I became aware that that's what was going on, the first part was I had to actually acknowledge that that's what it was me. It was a me problem. Become aware of it. Now, how do I fix it? And I got one of those small 3x5, memo notebook deals, and I had it on me all the time with a pen. And when I would get a text and I would feel my nervous system and my body go into, instant defensiveness, instead of sending something back, because rarely is it so important that it needs a response immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I would write down would what I would want to send, and then I would leave it, and I would come back, you know, hours later, a couple hours later, the next morning, sometimes depending on what the question I was being asked or what the message I got was, and then I would read it because my nervous system's calmed down and I'm not wanting to react. And, 99% of the time, I was like, I'm not sending that. That's just going to cause a fight. And then I would respond to the message with something that was a response as opposed to a reaction. But
Beautiful. Beautiful tool.
that it took a lot of, I mean, it took a long time, and even when, and the other part of the conflict, even though I knew that I was getting better. And even though I got to where I was responding instead of reacting, you still have to give them the grace and the time to make their adjustment. Just because all of a sudden I'm better at these things
Mm.
doesn't mean that they were doing it on my schedule. And so it's still going to take time to show that you actually are different in these things, because everybody that's ever gotten through a breakup or divorce, you've probably said, "Oh, I'm going to change. Oh, I'm going to change. Oh, I'm different. Oh, I'm different." And
Yeah.
you weren't. You know what I mean? You cycled back into the old habits. And so you have to give it that time that you have changed. And then everything will start, once you start getting better, it's the same as anything else. They'll get better and you'll get better and you'll feed off each other. And the conflict or collaboration part of it is the same. So you can either feed off each other's conflict and get worse, or you're both are going to feed off each other's, you know, uh, collaboration and get better. And so either way that you choose consciously or unconsciously to go, you're either going to keep going up or you're going to keep going down. And it's not it doesn't usually stay the same. And so if you're in conflict all the time, you're probably going to continue to escalate the conflict and keep going down. And if you're collaborating and getting along, you're probably going to keep collaborating and going up. And avoiding the awareness of avoiding some of these obstacles and conflicts, you know, is also going to be beneficial in a lot of ways. Same as having these conversations before you get married on
Mm,
parenting styles, disciplinary actions, and these and those things. When you get into these co-parenting spaces, once you get to a place where you can communicate, you can start setting yourselves up to avoid the obstacles that are going to that tend to be big hot buttons, new relationships, um, these sorts of things that are hot buttons and cause a lot of conflict. If you can communicate and sort those out before they come up, then you already have all these things in place. There's no reason for conflict because nobody's getting surprised because you've already come to understandings.
is it possible that it is all correlated with what kind of emotional engagement we get into the relationship at the first?
Hmm.
And I mean here a friendship.
Hmm.
If we come into the relationship with the status of pure meaning of the friendship, so we know each other, we grow together, we
Hmm.
develop, we have this synergy and communication. At some point, we go different ways.
Hmm.
From the research, it's quite common that even if we go away, we keep love based on the
Hmm.
friendship we have built. And usually there is a little conflict when we go separate. Naturally are coming these kind of conversations, as you said. Well, since we go separated ways, this is what most probably will happen. Yes, of course, man, I love you. Go and meet the woman of your life. Woman, I love you. I hope your future man will be a great, especially to
Hmm.
our kiddo. And they are not in the center. The child is in the center.
Right.
Whereas where we are missing this friendship part and we're going to build this imaginative dream world,
Hmm.
the conflict is happening before we get divorced.
Right.
From your work that you are doing and
Hmm.
with clients, with families that you're working, what are your experiencing? What are your observation? How the long-term conflict, with or without divorce, can have an impact on the kids?
There's a few different things that scare me. And I mean, usually when people are when people are holding out for the kids to grow up, move out, become adults on their own before they get divorced, you usually still have two people that have given up. And so you have like an emotionally disconnected, stunted household, and you're raising your children in this environment to where obviously there's not really open expressions of love. It's not healthy communication. It's two people who have emotionally shut down, and you're raising kids in a place where I'm in the same sort of environment that I was raised in, where your two roommates raising a child and they have no sort of example of what a loving relationship and a healthy relationship is. And so now your kids grow up and they don't know how to express love to their partner. They don't know how to be in a healthy relationship. They don't know how to have, communication and conflict resolution and all of these different things because you have two emotionally stunted adults raising children who have just completely shut down towards the other person. Now, I'm not saying you're not taking family trips and you're not doing these things,
Hmm.
but there's no date nights. There's no healthy love. There's no healthy expressions of love. Nobody's saying it to each other in these households and stuff like that. And even if you're trying to kids are not as naive as parents want to think that they are. And so this, you know, movie sort of actors playing parents and that they love each other and that they have this relationship, your kids kind of see right through it, right? I mean, I could tell when I was a teenager, which friends of mine's parents had real relationships that loved each other and they're still together now. And the ones that I was always like, man, I don't know why they just don't seem like they like each other. And then as soon as we all got out of high school, they got divorced. Like we were in tune to who was actually had parents who loved each other and families that were wholesome families, whether we acknowledged it or not. But through my 20s and most of the relationships up until I was, I'd started doing work on myself and healing from baggage and this and that, my relationships either mirrored what my parents had or I love bombed because you know,
Mm.
my parents had emotionally disconnected. They were kind of roommates more than, husband and wife my entire life. And so then I needed to overcompensate with the people that I was with, regardless of how toxic they were, we were, I was, because I have to overly share and overly love and, sort of not have boundaries in relationships and not, because I was trying to fill this hole of the emotionless disconnect of my childhood. So then, even knowing you maybe have both parents in the household, if there's a disconnect, or even if you're in two separate households, there's that disconnect, then your children are going to be trying to feed this hole, the daddy
Mm.
issue or the forgotten child syndrome or and then they get into these relationships that are, you know, m maybe toxic, maybe they're toxic, maybe the other person's toxic, maybe the other person isn't a user and but then you don't have boundaries because you don't want that person to leave, or you'll do whatever they think, or sacrifice your health and physical health, mental health, and all these different things because oh my God, don't leave me because then I'm completely alone. I don't want to be like these parents, and so I mean it can branch out in a lot of different ways because it's still not a healthy environment, whether you're together or not.
Like you say, we were not taught, but
Hmm.
just by being in a friend house,
Hmm.
you can see how other parents that are indeed in a healthy relationship,
Hmm.
they smile to each other differently
Hmm.
when they pass each other, when
Right.
they sit in the living room, when they are serving pasta. The type of
Hmm.
joke, the softness of voice is very, very different. The
Right.
physical touch is happening
Hmm.
where you, like you say, emotionally distant family, you'll say, oh, they never make this, they never,
Hmm.
hey honey bunny, they never tease each other. The teasing is a part of love
Right.
relationship, right?
Hmm.
And already there, despite we are not able to explain that,
Right.
the damage is happening. So like love bombing, people pleaser,
Hmm.
it's toxic, but we don't need that. I call
Right.
it in my work toxic need.
Right.
That we will get many scratches on our body until we realize, if we want to
Hmm.
realize, what is our drive to wrongly build relationships, or we are
Right.
showing up wrongly. Yes. Because you work with individuals, but also you work with the families, parents together.
It usually starts with one, and then at some point, because when somebody's doing work on their own for themselves, it does, I mean, at some point, it becomes obvious to everybody around them that they're changing and that they're
Mm,
doing better or being better. The reactions are different. The understanding, the communication, all these different, it's easy to tell when somebody's doing work on themselves and bettering themselves because everything around them's getting better and the way that they communicate, carry themselves, everything's better. And so when you're in a, the conflict's going down and you can tell that somebody's, doing work and doing these things, then it becomes a deal where a lot of times the other parent is more receptive in becoming involved. You know what I mean?
mm,
Because I, even if I'm working with one parent or the other, in to keep my viewpoint in check and my obligation in check, like I always remind myself that I'm working for the kids, not the parents. So if you're the problem, you're the fucking problem, and I don't care. You know what I mean?
That's
Because this is
great.
this is
That's great
detrimental to the
approach.
kids more so. And so it helps me stay more objective and it helps me sort of float in the middle. And I try to get, you know, when I'm interacting with the people or even just one parent, it's it's from the viewpoint of the kids more than the other parent. I don't care if you hate the other parent, and I don't care what the other
Mm.
parent did to you. This is what your actions in this situation are doing to your kids.
I love that the focus and that the boundary you are creating around I work for the benefit of the child,
Hmm.
not you have a happy life. That's
Right,
not that room.
right,
In you are talking also about I don't care about either you hate or not hating. It resonates with me because at the workplace, people are complaining, oh, I don't like him, I like him. Workplace is not about liking or not liking,
right.
it's about respect.
It's when you come at the angle or perception or get people to understand and they take themselves out of the equation or take the other parent out of the equation
Mm,
and your emotions towards the other parent is the least important part of this entire situation because nobody's for the I mean nobody really is intentionally trying to damage their kids, hurt their children,
mm,
ruin their kids' lives, make it to where they're going to be emotionally stunted as adults or have all this trauma and baggage to work through, or you know what I mean? And once you can kind of get them out of their own way and start seeing things through the lens of this is what you're doing to your kids and this is what the long-term effects on their lives are going to be, the easier it is to get them to sort of step back and see it from the bird's eye view because when you're in the trench, you can't see the battlefield, you know? And so, but when you step back and you can see the long-term effects in some of these things, and especially like, you know, when you talk about the chaos of these high conflict situations and the parents that can't get along and can't even face each other at school functions or, whatever the case may be. And it's like, your nervous system and your body and
mm,
your being gets used to whatever you're raised in. So if you're raised in all this conflict and chaos, then I have a daughter. So if we would have continued with all the chaos and all of this conflict, and now she's 10 now, but give it 10 more years of it, she's 20 years old. That's where her comfort zone is. That's where her nervous system feels
mm,
at home. That's where her, everything about, that's where she just feels comfortable. Now, I want the best for my daughter, so I would want her to have a healthy relationship, get married, these things, you know what I mean? So she's not going to feel comfort if she finds a good guy who just loves her, they have a great family. That quiet is going to throw her nervous system into fight or flight because that's not what she's used to. That's not how she was raised. That's not the environment that calms her,
mm,
right? And so if I want her to have a healthy relationship and have a healthy life with less amounts of baggage and trauma from childhood and all of these things, then I can't raise her in chaos because what's going to feel comfortable to her is chaos. And so guess what that is? That's the abusive boyfriends, the partying, the nightlife, the toxic relationships because that's what her nervous system has been raised in and that's where she'll stay as opposed to a healthy adult relationship with a family and kids and these things and those things. And that's kind of where you see these people jump into marriages at 20 and start having kids. And then when everything's calm, quiet, simple life, their nervous system goes haywire because they were raised in chaos and they start self-sabotaging and numbing themselves, and they need that chaos. And that's where you get a lot of these. I was in that cycle in my 20s of constantly, either numbing myself or self-sabotaging when things were quiet in my life and things were, going well, and I had a pretty good relationship with the person that I was dating and this and that. I would throw a wrench in it somehow or self-sabotage or blow it all up because it didn't feel comfortable to me. I wasn't used to the quiet and I wasn't used to the normal.
It's a great perspective, actually, that you have brought. What kind of foundation and how long chaos can
Hmm.
be built in a child, that actually to
Hmm.
break it later on when we become adult, it's really a hell of work that you have to do.
Hmm.
And what to build a sustainable or some kind of peaceful world for the child, having people in conflict. And then, okay, we have an action to create the boundaries. We need to play fair together and
Hmm.
the same goal. But then one parent will say, no. How do
Hmm.
you are responding, or how do you are working with this kind of parent that is insisting on not playing fair?
Nothing's overnight. And so picking your battles, picking the hills that you want to die on, picking, being intentional, but also actions are always going to be better than words. And so, you know, showing up and proving and showing up and showing up and showing up. And even if you get into these situations where you're very limited, especially in the US, it's one of those deals where, the dads are typically a lot more limited than the moms through the court systems and these things and those things. But if you're intentional and you show up when you're supposed to show up, you know what I mean? And don't make big deals out of things that aren't really that big a deal just because you want to make a big deal, or you know what I mean. Your feelings are hurt because you're caught in this situation. You have 6 8 days a month or maybe every other week or however it is, but these are, understanding what you have control of, the things that you can't control. How much you have to pay in child support is already decided. Now you can be mad about it, or you can just move forward and it is what it is. How much time you have is how much time you have. Are you taking full, you know, are you being totally intensive with the time that you have? Or are you sitting on the couch on your phone while they're sitting on the couch with their phone, and that's what you do every weekend that you have your kids? Or are you being an intentional parent? And are you showing up to all the school events? Are you showing up to all the sports events? Are you showing up to all the parent-teacher conferences? Or are you just like, man, they can do it? You know what I mean? Like, are you the person that they're painting you out to be, or are your actions showing that you're somebody else? And that's sort of a start. And then but nobody says that you have to engage in these high conflict situations. If you're in a situation where the other parent is always poking and trying to have these big blow ups in the parking lot of the drop off pickups and this and that, nobody said that you have to engage in these things. That's not part of the court paperwork. You don't have to sit there and be belittled. You don't have, you know what I mean? All you say, that's not how adults speak to each other, and you get in your car and drive off. Nobody says you have to sit there and take this abuse or take these, you know, finger wagging sessions and all these different things. And so being intentional with what you're doing, showing up and doing your best, and then it'll get better.
The sad thing is, which is quite often when there is the stage of divorce and
Hmm.
this battle is blurring the sightseeing,
Hmm.
uh, they are so much focused on winning
Right.
that the key principle, which is the good of the child, is
Yeah.
no longer the aim. It's like you mentioned the
It's
child
not really a
support.
part of the court systems, regardless of what they say. That's not the divorce process and the custody battle and all of this stuff. is a finger pointing, I'm better than you, I want control, my lawyer says to do this, and it ignites this very I'm going to paint myself to be perfect, you're a monster, so that I get what I want through the divorce process, you get nothing. And it stirs up a lot of these things also that maybe weren't a big deal, or
Mm.
these conflicts and this things and those things, but because it becomes a microscope of pointing the finger at the other person through lawyers and airing out everything that maybe you've perceived their wrongs, and they're doing it to you, and then now my feelings are hurt because you just embarrassed me in front of and then you know and then everybody feels like they got the raw end of the deal at the end of the court process, because you know dads get limit you know dads get limited because of they were doing what they were supposed to do, which is going to work 50, 60 hours a week to provide for their family and make sure that everything's taken care of. And now you don't get as much time with your kids because you work a lot. You were told you were
And
supposed to be doing. And then now you're being reprimanded, you're being hurt because you did what you were supposed to be doing, which was take care of your family. And now you get to pay the mother to babysit your kids so that you can work more to pay the mother to babysit your kids. And
mhm.
and you're a deadbeat dad because you have to work a lot, or and there's and it goes both ways. I'm not saying
It's
it's all dads that are on
unhealthy.
the one side, but it's unhealthy. And honestly, what at least in the US, and I assume probably a lot of other places, but the court system is a business, and what every business's goal is to generate more customers. And by
Mm.
breaking the families up and keeping and getting this conflict deal going, families that are with the more conflict or without the fathers in the homes generate more business, because all those kids are more than 90% more likely to be in the court system when they become adults. And
Yeah.
so repeat customers is the model for every business, and the court system's not any different. And so the best way to
Things like you said, the lighten up by the society, right? To
Mhm,
show the monster in the man, show the monster in a woman, depending
mhm,
where the conflict has the first sparkle, let's say,
right,
and blaming. And again, what do we want to prove here? Can we focus on
right,
the business? And the business is the child health, mental health.
mhm,
What is the myth about the co-parenting that you, as a coach and person who's
mhm,
working for the good of the children, the myth that you wish every couple that is going through separating time
mhm,
should immediately forget.
that your kids are unaware of the reality of everything that's going on, it would probably be one of them. And that that they don't need the other parent as much as they need you. And that's the dangerous part. But also, with the other parent kind of deal, I think it's, my daughter comes and goes as she pleases, and she's 10 years old. And we're we're not wrapped in the system. And so everything we figured out on our own. The schedule that we have is loosely based. My daughter's in a blended family now, and so it's loosely based on her stepbrother's schedule. When they have one kid, they have both kids, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And no kids, no kids. But she comes and goes as she pleases. Also, we live in a small area where everything's a mile away, so it's not like 40-mile drive to go get her or anything like that. But we don't, I think the biggest myth is that the court has your kids' best interest at heart. And so nobody's willing to be flexible with holidays, and nobody's willing to be flexible with time, and nobody's willing to be flexible with schedules, and it's
Mm.
all me, me, me. The court says that I have this weekend. And I think that is a huge I think that is probably one of the things that probably hurts your kids the most. And for an example, we have a loose schedule every other weekend and certain days during the week and this and that, but my daughter can kind of come and go as she pleases, which Doesn't hurt anybody's feelings because the rules at each house is basically the same. The food's basically the same. She's grounded there, she's grounded here. Nobody's playing favorites and trying to
Mm,
look better than the other person and this and that. But her mom went on vacation recently and is on vacation now, which gives grandma and grandpa in Oregon an excuse to come stay a couple weeks and spend time with their granddaughter. So, the 2 weeks that they're here, I may see her a day or maybe a couple days, no big deal. With any luck, I will probably outlive grandma and grandpa, spend some time with your grandparents. I see you all year. They see you, a couple times a year for a few weeks, this and that. I'm not, we're not sticklers to this schedule. Like, no, it's my time. You can't take her on vacation. And so when school gets out, she'll go back to Oregon and she'll probably be there 3 weeks to a month. And I won't see her except for FaceTime for 3 weeks to a
mm,
month. I'm fine with that. Go enjoy a vacation. Go travel. Go see other family members. Go visit all grandma and
mm,
grandpas and cousins and have a summer vacation. Like, but we have this, the myth of, well, this is what the court said our schedule needs to be. We have to follow it to the letter. You can't go on this vacation because I'm not giving up one of my days. And it's
mm.
like, and then it becomes a deal where like, oh, well, I gave up one of my days. What day are you going to give up? I know that you're supposed to be, it's technically the court said, or the schedule says that it's your weekend, but it's Mother's Day, so I should have the child on Mother's Day. How are we going to work that out? And it
Mm.
becomes like you're negotiating for, you know,
Right? It's even
your kids need both parents.
not
Like,
kind.
right,
It's
it's not.
I have been witnessing these kind of conversations, and can you take the child for the weekend because I'm exhausted. Last
Hmm.
few weeks had a lot of work. Oh, this
Hmm.
weekend, no, 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 because I need to rest too. I need to sleep. Okay, but in this case, the mother
Hmm.
was 95% is the person who is taking care of the
Right,
child.
right.
I am a single mom. So
Hmm.
it's not from Monday till Friday from 8
Right.
till 5 p.m. It's a 24 or actually 72 hours shift in one
Hmm.
day. So
And
that's
it
very trivial conversation, but unfortunately very common.
and it goes back and forth
Yes.
because if there's no compromise, give and take, empathy, understanding, respect for the other parent,
Mm,
and we had a deal, in very early on, even when we weren't necessarily in the most collaborative state, even when we were fairly conflictive and this and that, we had set up a couple deals that unknowingly at the time avoided a lot of conflict and a lot of weird stuff later on when we were able to communicate better and this and that. But one was we made a deal that because she was young when we had split up, that we had the right to first refusal. And it was
mm,
just a deal we made with each other. But if her mom's friends or something. They had a concert. She called me up on Saturday night. I wasn't expecting to have her, but she called me on Saturday afternoon and was like, "Hey, I have an opportunity to go do this, and this, whatever." Which, you have to heal a certain amount to not get jealous or not want to keep them
mm,
from living their life and doing these things. And to me, it never mattered what she was calling to ask, what she was doing. If she called, I got first call before any babysitters, any other family members, this and that. Hey, are you busy? Do you want her
mm,
tonight? Or, I'm going to do XYZ. Do you want her an extra night tonight? Or do you want me to call my parents, call your parents, whatever? And so, yeah, if I didn't have anything going, I took her. If I had something planned or going, it was no big deal to go to the next person in line and then the next person in line to call a different family member to see if somebody, wanted to watch her. But in order to make those deals, you have to have the certain amount of respect to be
mm,
like, you can have a life and I'm not going to throw it in your face later. But if you don't, in the situation you were just talking about, then next time he has something come up, that it's going to be an automatic no from the other side. And then it's just going to continue to ping pong back and forth of no's because of this one time that started because
Mm.
well, you didn't do it last time, I'm not doing it this time, and you're not doing it, didn't do it last time, so I'm not doing it this time. And that's how you get into this habit of always saying no and never having the empathy or respect for the other person. And
And
you
parents
know,
believe, as you already said, parents believe kids don't feel it, kids don't see it, right?
right.
And that's really terrible because, like we spoke about, they are growing in this kind of scenario. They are programming themselves,
Hmm.
and it's a dangerous. When you have a
Right.
girl, it's
Hmm.
dangerous. When you have a boy, it's also dangerous
Right.
because at the end it will turn that they will not be capable to build healthy relationship for themselves, and they will suffer even more. From your experience, who is struggling more, moms or dads?
I would say both for different reasons. And and even when you break down, the moms and the dads, there's different aspects that are going to generate different outcomes in both directions. I mean, you have your obvious ones of, the dad struggle because, even from my point of view, I went from being in the relationship, having access to my daughter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then you get thrown into being a single dad where in a lot of cases you're lucky to get 6, 8 days a month. So you just lost your kids for 24 days out of the month
Mm,
on average. And then, yeah, sure, in the summertime you get a couple weeks or a month, but that's not replacing that you just had your kids you went from having dinner with your family every day to seeing your kids 6, 8 days a month.
mm,
And then, so some of the stuff, the mental and depression and mental health of dads has really taken a hit because of
mm,
you just lost everything. Typically the mothers stay in the home with the kids. So you lost your your house, your home, your family, your kids. I mean, you lost a lot. And
mm,
society, it doesn't tend to have as much empathy or grace for men and their mental health issues and the suicide rates and the depression rates for losing their families and all of these different things because, especially, in the West or where men are basically told to shut up, go to work, man up, da 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 da.
yes.
It's becoming a little bit
Men
better,
don't
but
cry.
but when you're going into the divorce process and your lawyers tell you it's a waste of money to even fight for your kids because you're not going to win, you're already at the disadvantage. And then it becomes the conversation of why should I have to fight for my kids? Why shouldn't it,
Mm,
and then so that the men have it and the dads have it in a lot of ways like that, and it's a very old system of custody and this and that, and so there's that aspect of it. With the moms, it's a bit of a different sort of an angle where it tends to be more when moms become moms, they get thrown 100% into being a mom and they kind of lose their other identities as wife, you know, woman. And because it's, a lot of women sort of, when they become a mom, it's all consuming. I'm a mom. Dads have an easier time disconnecting and being dad when they have kids or with them. And then businessmen, golfer, you know, car enthusiast, whatever hobbies and friend groups and these and that. it's easier to kind of have these different hats and identities where moms are mom, and then they have it really hard when it's time to let the kids go. Because now all of a sudden, a lot of kids won't go because they don't want to leave mom alone, or it's hard to sort of have a healthy relationship, eh, you know, unhealed trauma and these things and those things, but a lot of times it's hard for them to heal and find themselves and get back to being them, not just mom.
Mm,
And then when the kids grow up, then you run into this dynamic of, you have the son husbands who are scared to go live their own life because they don't want to leave mom alone because mom's never been alone because I've always been here to help
mm,
and be the man of the house and take care of her. And the dynamics with the daughters tends to be more of the emotional support daughter, the, toxic waste dump of, all of these different emotions, the daughter therapist kind of deal or daughter best friend. And then you run into the same sort of cycle where the daughters grow up too fast and then they don't want to leave mom either and that kind of stuff. And so I think it's hard on everybody,
mm.
especially when you're unwilling to face or, do any sort of healing or work on yourself or emotional, you know, you know, education and this and that. It's easy to sort of get in these sort of, cycles of, pity party or poor me or,
Yeah.
one side or the other but everybody has it hard and the kids are all sort of caught in the middle. When I can tell just being at like my daughter's school functions and sporting events and this and that. And I mean, we barbecue all together in the summertime and sit by each other at school functions and do the school recitals and sit by each other and some holidays here and there if everybody's in town at the same time or nobody's traveling. And it's, all of us, her whole blended family, his ex-wife and her husband, their kids, and some other family friends. I mean, there's a big group of us that all do things all together, but two happy households are, have always been a thing that I grew up thinking that two happy households would always trump one miserable one because I grew up in one miserable one. But my daughter has full access to both parents and all grandparents, all cousins, and everybody else whenever she wants to. So nobody's holding her back from being allowed to spend time with whoever she wants. And I think that's the hardest thing on the kids is they don't care about a court schedule. And so they don't care. They want, but when you're competing with the other parent, you're adding this stress of, I need the validation or I need to prove that I'm the one that they should be living with and all of these different things. And so you're still not doing it for the benefit of the kids. You're doing it for the selfishness of yourself. And that's going to make it way harder when you start to fail or you know, if 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 the mom has most of the custody and the dad doesn't have a ton of access and the kid becomes 13, 14, 15 years old and starts deciding that they want to know their dad more or spend more time with their dad, but now they're scared to tell mom because they don't want to leave mom alone or mom will be crushed. I don't want to hurt their feelings. You know what I mean? Your kid's caught in the middle and you're feeling the pressure of always needing to be right or having to, prove yourself or need the validation or whatever. And then that's going to trickle down to your kids. And then you're going to have to deal with the effects of watching your kids go through toxic relationships and try to hide from conflict and all of these different things. And it's a hard thing to face later in life.
So when you are having two adult people and we are limiting this access, as you say, your daughter is
Hmm.
having to complex world, which is
Hmm.
amazing. And this is where she can grow her wings actually, because she
Hmm.
get the strength from the family,
Hmm.
not rip off the feathers from the
Right.
wings. Yes. And that's the maturity.
Hmm.
That's the maturity that we are not the center, but our child to shine and grow. And
Hmm.
that's our role if we are bringing the kid to the world. But it looks like indeed this selfishness, intention driven by the selfish ego,
Hmm.
can create huge damage in other human being life. And like you mentioned about the mental health of man, we don't speak about that enough.
Right.
It's from the general conversation we can perceive man more rational, woman more emotional.
Hmm.
And maybe this will be the reason, as you say, that when the woman is experiencing the divorce and separation, she becomes full 100% only mom. She forgets that there are other roles to play,
Right.
which is very unhealthy, of course, for her own development after the child is going ahead
Hmm.
away. But there will be also an element of guilt. Like we spoke about, let's stay with the kids until they are grown up. And we wait, not thinking we are already damaging the kids.
Right.
We decide we go separated. We talk about the bigger kids, yes, that they already understand the word of
Hmm.
divorce and split. But then there will be parents who are having the guilt, and they are overcompensating that guilt with gifts or
Right.
loosening the discipline, which already
Right.
is killing the world of child.
Hmm.
What advice will you give to parents to deal with the guilt in a healthy way?
Well, I mean, guilt's a tricky thing because it'll sneak up on you. I mean, it's it'll cloud itself or disguise itself in, codependency or, same ideas is, if you had a parent that was a drug addict that sort of
Mm,
ran off when you were in teenager, then all of a sudden, like, I feel guilty, so I'm gonna let my kids do whatever they want because now, their dad chose alcohol over them or drugs or whatever the case may be. And it's the same sort of idea. Do you want to be the enabler? I mean, it depends on the habits and it depends on the life and it depends on what, situations, but are you going to be is guilt making you enable your kids to be bad people or people that you're not wanting them to turn out to be, or allowing you to make rash decisions or allow them to do things that you wouldn't have let them do? And I mean, it's one of those deals where if the parents can't be on the same page, then when the kids become teenagers and think that they're already adults and they want to be, they're fighting for this independence. If you can't be on the same page, they're going to go to the place that has the least amount of responsibility, the least amount of rules, and the least amount of structure. And when you have one parent that allows them to run amok and do whatever they want, and one parent that has structure, I mean, I mean, I mean, no wonder they're going to gravitate towards the one that has the loose rules. And if you're doing that out of guilt, you're not doing them a service because
mm.
you're enabling them to make bad decisions, especially in the time where these decisions are going to have long-term consequences. And then that's where you sort of find these kids that are dropping out of school, getting addicted to drugs and drinking and doing all of these things at 15, 16 years old because the guilt from the failed relationship on that side is allowing them to run the house or do whatever they want because, well, I feel guilty that, you didn't have both your parents, so now I'm just going to let you do whatever you want. And I mean, it could be, or it's also the competition. Like, see, I'm the favorite. Also, it's going to be a mixture of guilt or trying to one up the other parent or you know, I don't want to be alone, so I'll let you do whatever you want to do so that you don't choose to stay at the other parent's house.
And it's all somehow putting to one big bag
Hmm.
labeled selfishness.
Right.
So if you want to learn something, just pick up those points and you have the answer. If you say yes, it means you are driven by the selfish
Hmm.
ego. If you want to change that immediately and contact JP Marsh is to change that. JP, before we finish, can you tell us how do you work with people? What they can expect in terms of the first impression?
Mostly one-on-one. Um, it started sort of in person because it was kind of one of those deals where people that were around us
Mm-hmm.
would come up and say stuff. And, I wish my situation was like that. I wish we could get along. And then it was just a deal where I just started interacting with people and then doing lunches and this and that. And then my, I grew up in and around the AA system. My dad got sober when I was, 6, 7 years old. And so being a coach and being a sponsor to me was similar because you're helping somebody that's, 3 to 5, 6 years behind you on the same journey, not to hit this booby trap and wreck everything that you've worked so hard for, not trip up over this situation and implode your whole life, same as getting sober or getting clean. And then it's a long process because you're having to change the way that you view the other person, think about your situation. It's a lot of me work as opposed to, I'll cheerlead for you, but I'm not going to sit there and tell you that the other person's a nightmare when you're the nightmare because it's a lot of me stuff. I mean, you have to be the co-parent that you want the other person to be, and you got to be the change and the example and the parent that your kids need. You can't just point the finger at everybody else and stay in your feelings and your pity party and think that's going to be the best route to being healthy.
Thank you very much,
Of
JP
course.
Marsh. I like that. As JP said, it's about you time, your awareness. If you are finding yourself in the position where you blame the other side, you don't need to be divorced. You might already have some red flags in your marriage. That's the great signal for you to connect with JP Marsh because it's not the game about you. If you're a parent, it's a game about your child to have a great life.